All right. Okay, so I am Michele Reed. I'm the planning director for the town of Mount Pleasant. And with me, I have Chris Lubert. He's right. I don't think you
Hey
can.
guys.
Yeah, he is a planner here with us. He's also certified arborist, certified track. So he does a lot for us. He does the Green Commission and Design Review Board, and he's also, as I said, one of our certified arborists. Um, so he deals a lot with the tree stuff. So Josh acts, excuse me if I can speak. Josh has requested that I go over kind of some high level things and then and include the trees, but I kind of want to talk about just some overall big things going on in the town. I also have with us Jenna. She is interning with us this summer. She just graduated from Clemson and she's a youngin' trying to figure it out and getting a little bit of a taste of local government and how everything works here. So anyway, with that, this is of course very informal, so just speak up if you have questions.
Yeah, we've got the Q&A set up at the bottom, everyone. So if you ask questions, we'll monitor that and can do that for everyone. So just we'll interrupt Michelle, I guess, as we go along
Yeah,
based on the questions
absolutely.
and answers we get coming in.
Absolutely. Sounds good. So I guess first of all, I just want to kind of cover the big one, which was that we finished our zoning code rewrite. We had the same zoning code effectively since 1979 or 1981. Of course, over the years, there had been many updates, sort of piecemeal changes, but this is the largest and the first time we really ever undertaken, completely redoing it. Now, a lot of things did stay the same, but a lot of things changed. So I was going to kind of hit the big points, and then when we get to the trees, I'll turn it over to Chris. Then I want to talk about we're doing the comprehensive plan 5-year update. It is the 5-year update, so it's not a complete, it's not as comprehensive in the sense that we would do every 10 years. But we did add that resiliency element, so I was going to talk a little bit about that. And then just overall some kind of big ticket items that are going on right now in the town, whether it's matters of concern or initiatives that the town is doing. So I was just going to hit on a few of those things. And then if there's anything that we don't cover that you have questions about, like we said, just speak up. So the first one is I'm going to start with the zoning code rewrite and the incorporation of the mixed use hubs. As I said, a lot of things stayed the same in the new code. But from the last comprehensive plan, we had this concept of hubs. And if for those of you that have been around a while, historically our zoning code had what we called an urban corridor overlay district. And that stretched for the corridor of Chuck Dolly, Johnny Dodds Boulevard, and Coleman Ben Sawyer. And in 2015, we had some new council members come on, and there was a movement towards getting away from that growth along the corridor, and what that had resulted in, and that it was not desirable of the new council and the folks that they were representing. So out of the comp plan came this idea of let's get rid of the development along the corridors and concentrate it in the hubs. So part of the zoning code update incorporated those hubs into the zoning code. They were really supposed to be small area plans that we did later after the fact, but there was a push to codify them to get something in this zoning code and not wait. So that's what our consultants did, and we ended up with 3 sub-districts. We have the neighborhood mixed use, which is a little bit smaller. There's 6 of those throughout town. We have 9 community mixed use, a little bit bigger, and then we have 2 larger redevelopment centers. And you can see on this next map, they're all kind of outlined in the peach color spread throughout town. So what really these hubs are, they're an overlay. So if you think about the hierarchy of our standards, if you have a development agreement in place, that's gonna take precedence. Then you have existing PDs, and I'll add that most of these hubs are PDs or part of a plan development, so they already exist. And then you have the standards of the overlay, and then you have the base zoning. And when these would come into play is if you're going to have a new use within the hub, or you're going to have a change of use, or you have a redevelopment scenario that exceeds the 50% replacement value or exceeds 250,000 in the cost of construction, and it's the lesser of those two. So if we have a development come in or a redevelopment scenario come in that meets one of those standards within the hubs, then you have different standards that apply. And some of those standards, really, the idea of these hubs was to further limit development that occurs even within these areas, not just outside of them. But so you think about the smaller neighborhood mixed use, the only residential they want to see in there is a live work unit. Neighborhood commercial type uses that you would think of, you walk to the local coffee shop, that sort of thing. The community mixed use, a little bit bigger. It does allow grocery, retail, that sort of thing. And keep in mind, the uses allowed are based on that base zoning, but this overlay adds additional regulations. Dwelling units, if you want to do dwelling units within the community mixed use, 20%. It can't exceed more than 20% of the development. And then that and the redevelopment center both have some allowances for greater density if you're going to do some type of affordable housing. And so that's probably one of the bigger things in addition to the trees that came out of this zoning code was these concept of these hubs and these mixed use centers. And again, this just went into effect May 1st. I don't think we've had any redevelopment within those areas or anything that's caught our attention yet. So we're still trying to figure it out, and we haven't actually applied it. But really, what the ordinance says is that you can't develop in those areas unless you do a PD. And so they've really council just really wanted to control what was going on in these areas and really kind of concentrate the development there, but also have better controls over it. So those are the mixed use centers. And one thing to point out, our new code is much more user friendly. It's not on American Legal yet, but it is linked to our GIS and our website. So if you go there, it's very easy to go very quickly and easily go to the section or subsection that you want to go on. So you don't have to scroll through pages anymore. And so if you want to know more about those, if you go to the new code, it's the zoning districts and it's one of the overlay districts. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Chris, and he's going to talk a little bit about our new tree ordinance.
Hey, good morning, guys. So I'm Chris, as Michelle introduced me earlier. And just forgive me, I'm a little slow. I just got back from vacation, so still processing, getting back into the mode. So as Michelle mentioned, we updated a lot of our tree protection ordinance, mainly based on a couple of factors. First one being our community forest master plan we completed in 2023. They were a big one that recommended, first off, reducing the size of our tree replacement trees. You'll see it used to be 4-inch caliper. We've reduced it to 2.5-inch caliper just to help homeowners, property owners to actually get and install trees, make it a little easier. 4-inch caliper, you're talking about a 14 to 16 foot tall tree. You're not going to do that on the weekend. You're going to have to hire a landscaper. So we wanted to make it easier to plant trees within the code. And then also tree protection zones, the big one, it was doubled. And that was a recommendation from the Community Forest Master Plan mentioning, hey, this needs to be more in line with surrounding municipalities. Charleston County being the big one. They've doubled theirs. And then also from community input, we were instructed to look at protecting pine trees of some sort. Mainly trying to protect longleaf pines is how it began, but to go through the actual development process, we thought that would be very difficult to differentiate between a loblolly pine, a longleaf pine, a shortleaf pine. There's a lot of different pines out there. So we just said, look, we're just going to protect pine trees 24 inches and greater. And then you'll see later on how we came to that conclusion, thinking in mind towards like Hurricane Hugo, because that's the event that sticks with everyone. And so then lastly, what came out of this is council put in a tree task force, which they are taking applications now. So if you're interested, you can go onto our website. I think it's under the boards and commissions and look to apply to be on that tree task force. And what they're going to do is they're going to look at further changing the ordinance possibly. And that's really what could come out of that. So definitely important if you're interested in this topic to get on that tree task force to help form this ordinance further. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is the tree protection zone. In this slide, what we did is we changed just one word. Before it said the diameter of which is equal to 1 foot for each inch of DBH measurement. We changed that to radius. And why is this important? I'll show you in the next slide. So right here, you can see the example. Before this zoning ordinance change, this 32-inch live oak in the middle of the page would have had that blue dash line. That was a tree protection zone. What it is today is that red dash line. So it essentially doubled the radius and definitely increased the square footage of the tree protection zone. So there are going to be, when you're developing or redeveloping, you're probably going to have a lot more tree encroachments, which leads to the next point. And this is just a copy from the old ordinance. This is modification to tree protection zones. This is the one brief paragraph that allows us to permit encroachments into this zone. And it says right there, we've highlighted through field determination and consultation. And it may require remedial procedures, things like tree preservation plans, just a little more detail of how this encroachment is going to work, keeping in mind the preservation of the tree. So that's the goal. And then how this could look. So this is just a brief site plan that I put on here for a house. So you see you've got a 55-inch triple leader. I'm assuming live oak. It just says oak, but we'll assume live oak. And then so the blue is the old tree protection zone, the red, the new. You can see the vast difference. And basically how we would approach this is say, okay, this existing one-story house with a crawl space foundation, so it's probably continuous footers. We would say, okay, you're kind of grandfathered in with that foundation. If you wanted to redevelop and you use, let's say, that exact footprint, but you just added a couple stories, that would be fine. We're not going to say, well, now that you took the foundation out, you have to get out of the tree protection zone and go develop up to the right side of that site plan. And this is because root growth, you can kind of estimate where it is. When you have a foundation and you have all this open area, the roots aren't just going to grow towards or through the foundation. They like to be opportunistic. They don't want to just grow through concrete, grow through pavement, although they do. You typically only see it out of necessity or there's some issue with the foundation, with the pavement, with the concrete, with the base layer. It's always a reason to let it in. There's a water leak or something towards that. So normally we can estimate that there's not going to be any substantial roots within that foundation at this time. So we'd say, hey, you can go ahead and use that. And then wherever else you further encroach, that's where you would hire a certified arborist. Look at root expiration, basically giving us justification to why we should permit whatever addition into this tree protection zone. Also keeping in mind to just the ultimate goal, preserve the tree. That's what everyone wants to do. So those are a couple factors of what that could look like. And this is, again, it's going to be a site by site analysis. There's no across the board, like this is going to be the same for everywhere. It's really going to be in-depth review from our end, from clients' ends, for arborists as well. So the most important thing, just getting a certified arborist on board when you come to these situations. And then, so the next thing we added here, about the tree removal and replacement.
Chris, real quick, back out of your scenario before, we have a question about replacing residential decks in these protection zones.
So again, it just comes down to what the footings of the deck is. If you're just doing spot footers, that's usually the best case scenario for encroaching into tree protection zones because it's typically a little easier to dodge these larger structural roots or develop around them. The biggest hindrance just is continuous footers. So if you're doing spot footers, you're more than likely okay. The chances of you damaging a large structural root, and when I say large structural root, I'm talking about things over 3 inches in diameter. It's going to be hard to cut. It's going to be hard to put this footing through anyways. So more than likely you wouldn't do it even if there wasn't a tree protection zone there. But those are the roots we want to protect. The feeder roots you can typically sever with no issue. But with spot footers, probably not going to be an issue. The continuous footers are just going to be the most invasive because you're just basically going to trench right through and cut everything.
So with a arborist coming through and doing the plan, I think most of our members are going to be dealing with potential buyers that are looking to see what they can do with their property before they buy, right? Whether they want to put in the pool or renovate or whatever else. Um, how long would that process probably be because they'll probably want to get under contract and then start trying to figure out if they can do something with that property, or the new protection rules might hinder that. So what does that process look like? I guess it maybe now's the time or later on in the presentation to kind of talk about how long that kind of takes.
No, now's a great time. There's no real official process. Everything, when you get ahead and you guys are looking at purchasing a property, everything is kind of done informally. People will reach out to myself, our urban forester, Eddie Bernard, or our two development code inspectors, Russell Walker and John Wagner. Um, so, so basically, it just starts with getting in touch with us, kind of having a layout, a survey or something, and saying, hey, I'm talking with my arborist. This is what we're looking at. What do you think? And just starting the conversation there as soon as possible is only going to help you guys. And also, when I say arborist, there's a lot of certified arborists out there. Not to discredit any of them, but you definitely want to find one that's more in tune with construction because there are certified arborists that they mainly focus on, pruning canopies, removing trees, looking just at defects. There's kind of a niche crew that's good about looking at construction damages, looking and foreseeing the issues, and those guys are going to be, you know, worth worth a lot because they're going to be able to say like, look, I've seen this before. Here's an example. We've done this. It's fine, and you can even use that for your justification. So getting with a good arborist who understands construction processing, kind of damages related to trees, and it has experience in that direction, that'll be a good start. Reach out to us, loop us in the conversation as soon as possible. You can email me, like I said, Eddie, Russell, or John, and just start that conversation. But there is no official process for how it's going to look. The official process is done through the building permit review. But if you're looking at buying the house, you're obviously not going to be in that process yet. But we'll work with you guys to understand that, hey, this is something we think is feasible, or, maybe, hey, this is going to be tough. And honestly, the hardest ones we see currently are pools. Putting a pool inside a tree protection zone is going to be very difficult just because of how compaction, you're digging down, you're just cutting everything. So pools have become the hardest thing that I've seen today.
Also, couple follow up on the debt question. So it's okay to use existing spot footers then without contacting the town for the deck?
Yeah, existing spot footers would be fine. We're not going to get too in the weeds on that unless there's, like I said, a structural root growing through it, which is highly unlikely. So it'd be fine.
And then a question, I guess, is follow up to is like, what's required of that homeowner? Do they have to do the survey, hiring the arborist? Like, so if they want to do something, they're going to need to do the survey and all that first before they
So
do the construction stuff, building permit stuff, or
again, it's kind of case by case analysis. The biggest area we're seeing this in is obviously our older neighborhoods, like around Scalionville, around Mathis Ferry area, south of Coleman Boulevard. So if you're redeveloping, a survey is always going to help because you're going to need one when you go to building permit anyways. They're going to need to see different items for stormwater, basically the pre-existing condition for stormwater. So you're going to want one anyways, but also just make sure they have the foundation on there. And it's just going to help for us to justify if we approve the encroachment of like, hey, this is the existing site. They're reusing this. And then over here, the arborist said they're okay. They weren't going to cut any structural roots. They're also doing this preservation plan. So yeah, it will definitely help. If you're looking kind of in the north end on an undeveloped lot, that's going to be not as important to have a survey. You will need one eventually. But if you're considering to buy the lot, I would just get out there and see what trees are historic, where they are, and kind of what condition. So again, getting back with the arborist, getting them on site because they can give you a good idea of like, hey, this is a healthy 24-inch live oak. This is going to be difficult to deal with. So
And
yeah,
then
it's
a
just
couple more questions. One goes about vacant lots. Obviously, it would probably will significantly reduce some of the building envelopes you can do on the vacant lots.
yeah, we haven't had too many reviews that I know of vacant lots at the time right now. But it'll hinder it. But again, it just comes through if you get further out. So when we get further out into, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you get into
Mhm.
this area, there's not likely going to be any structural roots. So permitting stuff with like, I think the county just does a straight 33%. Stuff like that, we're going to try and work with contractors and applicants on. And just detailing the biggest thing when you get into undeveloped lots, not so much root exploration, because I guarantee you there's going to be roots all over the place. You're not going to know what tree it belongs to begin with. So it's just going to be looking at the grade changes, and then looking at kind of preservation techniques, looking at mulching where you can't, put it in preservation plan, things like that.
And if I'm right, like these rules went into effect May 1st, right?
Yes, sir.
And so I've got a question about grandfathering, about they were already kind of in architectural design, permitting, structural design phase for a house. How are you working through those issues to the people that were already kind of going through the process?
I think we officially said, and Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong, that anyone that was in the process of designing during the zoning change and you were designed to the old one, we're pretty much going to look at it as like, okay, we're just going to look and review this with the old code. And then moving forward as that phases out, everything will be new code. But
All right, great. Thank you. I'll let you continue. Just wanted to get some of those questions in. I've got some more
yeah,
coming in, but I'll work through them as I think you'll hit on one on later.
yeah, there's always a lot of questions. It's not as straightforward, but this is why we like to set these things up. So definitely just ask. I can go back, forward, whatever you guys need. Just stop me and ask questions. So getting back, so basically we always had you remove a protected, significant, or historic tree within the town of Mount Pleasant, you need some kind of permit. That didn't change. You still need a permit. What has changed is we said, okay, now you have to replant a tree when you remove a tree, at least one tree on your property. So we want to see a replacement plan typically, and this is only coming into factor for we're just looking at easements, right of way, like where is this tree going to be? Make sure it's in a good spot. It's away from any structures so that when it grows up, it doesn't destroy anything. It doesn't become a problem. You put it in easements, there's a chance if we come through and we have to fix it, we could either damage or remove the tree. That's not good. We want a good, healthy canopy. So we just put in a replacement plan just basically to say, hey, where are you putting this tree? Just let us know before you plant it because we're encountering a lot of homeowners that would plant a beautiful tree, but either it's in an easement or it's not even on their property, it's in the right of way, things like that. So we're trying to get ahead of that. Not meant to be a hindrance, but just to be, let's plant smart and efficiently. And so basically, the next part we added to, like I alluded to, if you remove a tree, you have tree mitigation. Before, you could pay the entire tree mitigation into our tree bank. At this time, you have to at least plant one. And then you kind of have to demonstrate, hey, I don't have any more room to plant any more canopy trees. And then at that point, and that can be done through the replacement plan to show that, at that point, you could pay into the tree bank. So we kind of added that part just again to get more trees in the ground. There's only so much public property in the town of Mount Pleasant that we can plant trees on. So we need help to try and grow this canopy. And then here's what I talked about earlier. Tree replacement, the caliper, it's gone down to 2.5 inches. So it should be easier. You likely might still have to have a landscaper help you out to just plant it, source it, get it on site. But at least it's not a 4-inch caliper, 14-foot, 16-foot tree. And then also on residential plans, you still have your minimum 160 caliper inches to retain. And then also each newly platted lot shall have one of those 2.5-inch canopy tree retained or planted on site, preferably on the front yard. And so this is just to make sure, again, keeping canopy coverage goals in mind and keeping everyone in line to cover.
And how does this affect all the existing, planned developments that have been approved that haven't been built yet? Development agreements. Do these new rules as well? So
No,
no.
this wouldn't be applicable. If you had a
Okay.
PD or development agreement, that would, like Michelle said earlier, that's going to take hierarchy over these.
Okay. Couple questions on this coming in. How recent does the survey need to be?
By ordinance definition, I want to say it's 1 or 2 years. I think 1 year. But obviously we can work with you guys. I've done it before when I was on the development code side, looking at single family plans. That's usually where we have the most leeway. Because I know surveys aren't cheap. So usually what we would do is say, hey, use this survey you had, and what we'll do is we'll just update the tree information onto that, because that's the biggest thing we're looking for is the tree information. We can help with that. But that's typically, again, it's case by case, and typically only something for the single family. We don't want to get into doing that with commercial properties. Those are a lot bigger sites
And
and
how are
a
you
lot more.
handling like where the church trees, the roots are starting to affect the foundations, driveways, roofs, are the existing stuff? How are you getting into figuring out which trees, on that side of whether it's affecting the other stuff? The question came in as.
Okay, so if it's on an existing home, let's say you're not going to do an improvement to the house, you're just going to keep it, you're buying the house, but this root is affecting the foundation. Basically, as our ordinance, it's still the same. It says today is we would want to hear that from a registered engineer, someone to say like, hey, for sure, if it's even obvious, if there's cracks in the foundation, you see a big root and it's obviously cracking it. But again, it just comes down to justification if you want to remove it. And if it's cracking a driveway, that's not that's typically a harder reason to push for a tree removal. Driveways can always kind of be worked around. It's not There's no ordinance that mandates it has to be concrete. So you could look at pervious options, you could look at root pruning. So we always with driveways, it's going to be a little more difficult for that to be a justification. For foundations, we understand. Again, it just comes down to justification. Show us that this foundation's actually being destroyed by the tree and that you can't take remedial procedures. Because there's things like root pruning, which is just basically same as canopy pruning, except you're just cutting the roots. That's fine. Trees can adapt to that. You can do root barrier. So just looking at all options available. And for canopy, if it's touching the roof, you can just canopy prune and go from there.
And I've got a bunch of questions specific on pine trees, but I think you're going to get into the pine trees altogether,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, pine trees are coming up.
And one more before we move on, just to address it, because I know the answer, but you just a lot of people are asking um how Dominion and tree ordinances play with the way they handle trees. If you can just talk about utilities.
Yeah, so Dominion specifically, They have a franchise agreement with us. And they're allowed to prune just like a residence or a commercial property. You're allowed to prune your trees. It just has to be to what we call ANSI standards, which I don't know it exactly, but it's like American Nursery Standard. Basically, is what our ordinance references. You have to prune it. You have to prune it correctly. What they do when they cut this L into the tree technically is permissible by ANSI standards. So we're just looking at their cuts, making sure they're not leaving stub cuts in areas where they're removing too much of the canopy. We'll work with Dominion to replace the tree or other options at that point. But yeah, it's all just under ANSI. So work with certified arborists. That's what they do. Typically, we have to oversight their certified arborists, but it's all in the franchise agreement with the utility.
And then one more question before we move on to your stuff is determining whether a tree is considered a shared base or joined at ground level,
Mm-hmm.
how that works.
Yeah, so we introduced basically they're called boundary trees. It's just where a tree is, if we'll just say it splits the property line perfectly. That means both homeowners co-own this tree. And so if one neighbor wants to remove it, but the other doesn't, typically that needs to be worked out between homeowners. We put in now that with boundary trees like this, we would want both homeowners' permission. And also this is to protect, you as a homeowner. And we've seen it happen a couple times. If you remove that tree without the other homeowner's permission, this could lead to, lawsuits down the road between homeowners, which is never a good way to start, once you move into a house. So basically what we do is we just say, hey, in writing, just make sure both guys are in agreement, make sure they both understand that there's going to be tree mitigation possibly, and that it can be worked out, amongst them. One guy can do all the planning, the other guy can pay, or however such, just to work it out amongst themselves. So yeah, boundary trees are definitely a thing. You still have to protect it, even if it's a quarter on your property, it's still technically co-owned. So it's going to be, again, just case by case.
All right, I'll let you move on now. I've got some more questions, but they're more geared to later on in the presentation I know about. So
Yeah. So here is the next thing. So here's the big pine trees. And there's a couple slides on this. I've put in just some examples of the pine trees we're trying to protect versus the pine trees we're all familiar with. So like I said, pine trees 24 inches or greater are considered historic trees outside a protected buffer and are protected the same as basically you say category 2 laurel oak or pecan. It's going to be right in there. And then the next part, and this is another thing we change as well. So when you go to remove historic trees, let's say for a commercial project, the design review board has purview over historic tree removals. When you go to do a single family subdivision, planning commission has control basically over those historic tree removals. And then townhouses and multifamily developments already had to go to BZA. So this just went ahead and put another layer essentially over single family houses. It just says removal of category 1 or 2 historic trees. So think live oaks, magnolias, bald cypress, laurel oaks, pecans that are classified as good or fair are going to have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for approval of removal. And this is done just to get it to a public forum. There's been a lot. You can go look at the agendas too to see how the board has been doing with this. There's been a lot of trees already, as you'd suspect, that have gone to the Board of Zoning Appeals with this one. So they've been okay. I can't remember off the top of my head if they've denied one. One got dragged along for a little bit, but they eventually approved it. So again, it's just making sure, and you have an arborist, he gives it a condition, because if you don't go and get an arborist report, and let's say you have a poor tree and you take that poor condition tree to BOZA, but you don't have an arborist report, there's more than likely you're going to get denied without doing kind of the basic groundwork. So definitely, again, having an arborist, getting this tree assessment. If it's a poor tree, we can still approve it on staff level. If it's a good or fair tree, then it'll more than likely have to go to BZA. The BZA has been amendable to this. They understand trees right smack dab in the middle of the lot. That's kind of hard to design around, and it really prohibits development of the lot. And then pine trees, again, 24 inches or greater, are also going to be under that same requiring to go to BZA for approval.
And a lot of questions on pines because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people remember Hurricane Hugo in Mount Pleasant and
Yes, sir.
or just storms in general and being worried about
Mhm.
the protection of the structure itself and why they're protected. Right. Why'd y'all move? Why was the move to protect them?
So again, the big move was trying to really protect longleaf pines. We've got some beautiful longleaf pines in the Groves area, south of Coleman Boulevard and what the village area. I don't want to call it the old village because I'll get yelled at, but in that general area, there's a lot of longleaf pines that were getting removed, and those longleaf pines are very, they're natural, they're native to our area. They actually perform very well in storms. Um, I've not seen one come down again, though. Hurricane Hugo, you're talking about a class 4 above hurricane. There's really no trees safe from those. But I do understand. I heard stories because I wasn't born yet, but that these things were snapping off the top and just like kind of like missiles. So our thought is, well, we don't want to protect because what we saw a lot was these guys, and this is like North Mount Pleasant, where you had a lot of pine tree plantations back in the day, and you still have a lot of these tall loblolly pines that will snap. Their leverage point is going to be right in the middle of the tree, so the whole tree is not going to fail; it's just going to snap. Um, that's not what we're protecting. That's not the intention. The intention is kind of these big trees that have grown in the site.
So when someone comes to you with those others, that's kind of going to be looked at differently than if you come with a long leaf kind of thing.
Yeah, and these aren't even like these trees here in North Mount Pleasant, they're not going to get 24 inches in diameter.
Okay.
Very unlikely chance. The way they grow, they shoot up like a blade of grass, we'll say, just reaching for the sun. Um, yeah, they're not going to
So it
get that.
sounds like a lot of discretion kind of thing based on what kind of species it is and where it is and how big it is.
Yes, there is. And I will say, even with these past storms we had 2 weeks ago, um, to my knowledge, I did not see any pines in our area down. The biggest trees that I see fail in just like the minor storms, not hurricane fours, is like water oaks, laurel oaks, things that hollow out that no one's paid attention to. And that all of a sudden this thing just fails in a basic storm. Those to me are the bigger hazards. But again, I've not lived through a catastrophic hurricane like Hugo down here, so I can't speak to that.
All right, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And one more on pine trees. Do you have kind of know the typical diameter of a mature loblolly pine?
No, I don't. It's again, it's case by case. There's different factors. Was it grown in the forest? Like what you see on the right side here, this is what I would call a forest grown pine tree. These guys aren't going to get big in diameter because again, their goal is not to use their resources to create a bigger taper. That's the word I'm looking for. Um, a bigger trunk because they're going to have wind protection. This pine tree here, he's going to be protected by all these other guys with the wind. So his goal is going to not be so much as protect himself from open and heavy winds, more so just get to the top so he can get sunlight as well with his, other buddy pine trees. So when you look at this guy here, this guy was open grown. You can tell that because he's got lower limbs that have a lot of vegetation. They're stretching out. He's not growing as high. Um, So that's kind of the difference, and you can see the bigger taper diameter of the stem, which is going to have more strength there too. So
Now, is that one on the right going to be 24 inches in diameter?
it's hard to tell. I
Okay.
would assume so, just looking at it. But yeah, it's just case by case. Open grown are typically going to, what I'm getting at is open grown are going to be 24 inches and higher, more than likely. Um, Growing in the forest, you're not. So I would not suspect you're going to see these on undeveloped lots, probably more redevelopment developed lots.
All right. You got more. You keep going. Sorry. Didn't mean to
No,
stop.
you're good. The last point I've got is this tree task force. So again, if you feel strongly one way or the other about this ordinance, this is a great thing they created. If you live in Mount Pleasant or know someone that's here, definitely encourage them. I think all the seats are at large, but they do recommend, having arborists, design professionals, people with a stake in the game, so to speak. So that's definitely important. This tree task force is going to be a 1 year task force. It's not run by the planning department. It's going to be run by our executive offices. And it's just, that's what we know right now. And, who knows what's going to come out of that. But if you feel strongly one way or the other, I definitely recommend putting in an application, and try and get involved that way.
And I put the link to the application in the chat as well for people to look at. I want to get through some of the questions I have. They were kind of various ones. So
Yeah.
the question back around, I think around the shared tree stuff was how the how you're measuring a tree that may have multiple places coming out, right? Like how you're measuring that shared tree kind of thing when you're talking about how you're measuring the diameter of the tree where it might have the base being joined.
So you're saying you have multiple leaders essentially.
Yeah.
And so what we have, basically our ordinance has it, I think it's 4 feet and below. So if the tree splits at 4 feet and below, you'd capture each individual leader. And I want to say that leader has to be bigger than 6 inches. So like magnolias they're going to split all over the place below 4 feet, but you only need to capture that leader when it's over 6 inches in diameter. So it's a little trickier. And if it doesn't split below 4 feet, you're not going to count all the leaders. You're just going to measure that single stem. And then if you have, let's say you have a triple leader water oak or a triple leader laurel oak, those trees, while they're going to have a huge tree protection zone and a huge diameter, they're not going to be considered historic. Only live oaks that have more than 2 leaders are considered historic. So if you have a magnolia with 6 leaders or something insane like that, it's still going to be processed as a significant tree, which means it wouldn't have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for removal, which is the important thing. And that's going to be the biggest difference between significant and historic. It's still going to have tree mitigation, but the removal is probably going to be handled on a staff level for that.
All right. And then question as well. Let me try to get through these. And there might be more for things. How are you enforcing tree protection zone violations, particularly during construction, about parking trucks and materials in that tree protection zone?
So it's difficult. I'm not gonna lie, but typically what we'll do is we kind of do like steps, and this last step being we'll write a ticket if we need to or put a stop work order. But usually what we'll do, we see it, we'll reach out to the contractor, ask them to get this corrected, and just evaluate if we see any compaction or any damage done. If there was damage done or compaction, we'll typically ask for going back to remedial procedures or preservation plan, just some kind of plan that says, hey, you did this, you damaged it. How are you going to make this right for the tree? And then if this keeps becoming a reoccurring issue, then that's where this gets escalated to, okay, this is obviously an issue. Like we'll put a stop work order on where they'll have to get all the barricades up. Maybe they'll have to use chain link for everything, not just the historic trees. they might have to do a preservation plan and get it to us before we lift the stop work order. And then also, if it gets further, we could write them tickets to come to our court and plead that. And that could be a ticket no greater than $500, but each offense could be ticketed. So you could rack those tickets up for every day you're not in compliance, essentially.
Thanks. And some of these may be Michelle questions now, I'm not sure, but I think you guys talked about one question is, you talked about putting it on par with Charleston County. Was there a lot of look at about how individual lots or overall development of and redevelopment of parcels would be kind of affected as they put the rules in place? Was that countered in, or was it just to be on par with Charleston County? I guess someone has questioned, obviously, we're trying to the region needs housing, and so I think the question is around, counterbalancing the need for tree protection versus the need for housing and development.
Yeah, it definitely came up. We understood that this is going to be a huge change, but we had that paragraph in there that talked about, what we can make modifications to tree protection zone. And again, that's what we were doing. Our original tree protection zone, they didn't just say, okay, just bring it up to the county, and we're like, all right, yeah, we'll do that. It's also recommended, by ISA, by all these studies we looked at. So it's actually not fair to say that it was just solely based on county. We were just looking at the tree preservation itself. If you go into the north end of Mount Pleasant, you'll see a lot of dead, declining trees. It's just not good. They have clay soils. The roots are in the top. All those trees are getting damaged, even though they're respecting the tree protection zone in place. So it was just kind of a combination of all that. We did think about it. We were hoping with this tree task force, once they mention it, is like, okay, well, maybe that's where the person comes in and says, hey, let's look at doing this 33%, or kind of having some kind of standard for encroachment so that when houses come through, there's more standardized approach rather than just informal, hey, let's meet with planning staff and let's figure out what we can or can't do. It does leave a lot of open-endedness there. So it's still something we're working through. But yeah, the decision definitely came from more areas there.
And this may not be affected issue because you say you're aligning with Charleston County, but I think there's question about for annexation, of bringing something in, because what happens first, right? The annexation, looking at how a vacant lot may be able to have a house built on it because they're trying to get water and sewer, obviously. So how does that process work to see if the plans could work within Mount Pleasant's zoning ordinance before annexation's requested? Obviously, for those reasons, I guess that's kind of the question of what chicken or the egg, what comes first, right? Like making sure that you match Mount Pleasant's ordinance and you can get the house built you're trying to get built on the lot with the tree removal plans, or annexation first. You need annexation before you can look at it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, and it's always tough. And of course, also it depends on if you're requesting a zoning district that's not what that parcel is recommended for. For example, if you're in the county and you're in their S3 management, that's the same as our CC and community conservation. So you can kind of anticipate the same minimum lot sizes, the same development standards and setbacks. That's going to be pretty comparable. And as Chris said, our tree ordinance is a little more comparable. The tree protection zones are a little more comparable to them now. We didn't just look at them as well. We looked at some other municipalities, and in 2023, the town also hired a consultant to do a community forest master plan, which also recommended that our tree protection zones were outdated and not up to par with some of our other municipalities. But I agree with you. I think probably here, internally, staff, we recognize that this was going to be difficult, particularly with those established neighborhoods where you have folks that do have those mature trees and that maybe they want to do additions or build a detached structure because, you know, parents are aging. So we recognize that. And I would just say that we have our council's very dedicated right now to the tree canopy. Not that they're not dedicated to housing, but this has just been a very important issue for them. And so in weighing those things, I think they just, you know, when they adopted this, they saw it as we're prioritizing the canopy over, you know, some of these other issues right now. So I think that's probably the nicest way I can say that.
Yes, I get that. I think one question comes in around the time frame element, and this might be a Chris question again, is to, you know, most a lot of times there's in a real estate contract here, there's going to be a period of due diligence, right?
Right.
And the buyer's going to want to try to get that done within that period of due diligence, which is negotiable up front, but traditionally is around 7 or a little more days than that.
Right.
About trying to get that kind of um, review looked at in that time frame to be able to know whether to move forward with the contract or
Move
not.
forward or not. Yeah, you know, that's a challenge. Obviously
Or what that due diligence might want to look like, you know, because it is
right,
negotiable. So maybe a suggested time frame that y'all would need to turn that stuff around.
right. Well, I mean, those assurances are important. I don't want to purchase a piece of property if I need to add on to the house, and I can't add on to the house because I'm not going to be able to encroach into that tree protection zone. I get it. I didn't realize that amount of time was only 7 days. That's shorter than I thought it
Well,
was,
I mean,
but
it's negotiable, so it's just whatever
right.
people want to put it as, right? But the seller's got to accept it, right? So.
Right, sure. You know, just going back to what Chris already said, and Chris is absolutely right. You know, he works with people. We're trying to be common sense with a difficult ordinance that we know can cause hardship. And so I think just immediately, if you have potential buyers that anticipate what they want to do, they know they're going to encroach into a healthy tree protection zone as early as possible, just giving him a call and saying, "Hey, here's what we're thinking. What are the chances?" And but I mean, we're not going to be able to say 100% until we have a plan in front of us. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of it. You know, until
And so
we have
that's tough because I would
it
say
is.
maybe the listing
It
agent
is.
should reach out and say, hey, what could be done here? But then
Yeah,
without a real plan of knowing who the buyer is going to be, that's going to be tough.
right. It is. It is. And you know, Ryan, these are the things that even if you're not on the task force, they need to hear this. These are all going to be public meetings. And so they need to hear how these ordinances are affecting folks like you guys and your clients. Because I'll be honest, during the ordinance update, they didn't hear this. They heard from a few vocal tree advocates that don't want anything cut down, even if it's, you know, a hazard tree, or if it's you know, it's got a fungus and it needs to come down. They don't want anything taken down. So you know, as Chris said, this is going to be a real opportunity for the people on the task force to hear how this affects property owners and potential property owners, because it really
Yeah,
does.
and I think a lot of it's all about new development, not, you know, being able to use your own property for a new deck or a new pool or addition because you know, or an ADU because you're trying to, you know, create some housing stock, or
Yeah.
have aging parents, things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so I'll just end on that with we'll do the best we can to provide you some type of assurance that, hey, we think this can work, but it's, you know, without an absolute approval, it's going to be really hard. And until we have plans in front of us and we're actually reviewing them. But it always helps to have a conversation with Chris or Eddie about
Yeah, and what
what
is
you'd
the
like to
best
do.
contact way, Michelle, for them to get in touch with Chris and Eddie?
Email, which we
Yeah.
can provide
Yeah.
if you want to give that out.
What?
Yeah, I can send you all our emails after
Yeah,
we
that'd be
hang up
great.
here.
Send it out and we'll
Okay.
get it out in we'll do a recap with this
Okay.
out there with some of our links to everyone who attended and get those contact information out. That'd be great. You
Sure.
send
Okay.
those over to Josh. Couple more
Yeah.
questions.
Okay.
Maybe more for Chris. This one is about
Absolutely.
large sweet gums. Those aren't going to be considered historic trees, are they?
No, those won't be considered historic. They are still not protected unless you're talking about a critical line buffer, natural highway buffer, things like that. If you're outside a buffer, you have a 40-inch sweet gum, it's still not protected.
All right, and then someone asked that this may be probably a different issue, but they're obviously asked for a reason. Michelle, have the rules changed for a homeowner that wants to add a new bulkhead to a marshfront lot with the existing home in order to tie into the existing bulkhead and deck? They for some reason think there may have been changes on that.
Oh, I would say not yet. The mayor has asked for, on our flood resilience committee, the town engineer has been doing some presentations on the Bluffton ordinance and protecting wetlands. So they looked at that. So they're looking at wetlands. We've got some other studies coming out that talks about sea level rise and ways that we can address it. And there could be something coming in the future about bulkheads and can they have them and where can they have them. But there's nothing right now in the ordinance that has changed. I don't think it requires a permit unless it's 4 feet tall or something like that. So, but as of now, that has not changed, but that is something that we're looking at through Flood Resilience Committee.
All right. And then one, I guess also last question then, and maybe an update for people to, as you said, they need to hear from people and how this would affect it. I know Planning Commission last week was looking at new changes to regulations in the older Mount Pleasant neighborhoods. Any update from what they were doing and anything, and you probably have some other stuff to go through as well
That's okay. I can
potentially.
jump to that.
Wanted to kind of ask that too.
No, you're absolutely right. So this came up, let me go to the map here. So we have this area, obviously you have Old Village. I don't think my mouse works there. Obviously you have Old Village and then you have these other Old Mount Pleasant, Shimwood, Bayview, Cooper Estates, and the Groves. And those are all within an area that we have called Neighborhood Preservation Overlay District. And there's just some extra standards in that area as far as impervious surface coverage and stuff. So what came up really from a couple of concerned citizens was how much new development was occurring, particularly in Old Mount Pleasant, because we have extra measures with Old Village. We have the HDPC that reviews everything there, but this was coming from people in what they call the Indian Village. It's Barbara Street, Heather Street, some of those areas over there. And particularly folks that want to try and maintain their ranch houses or their smaller, more modest homes, and they're kind of they feel like they're being kind of run over by larger houses and just the size and mass and scale of some of these newer homes. And, a part of it is, it seems like should have addressed this 20 years ago, but here we are. And the mayor asked that this get placed on the committee agenda. And so we did talk about it. We talked about the number of demolitions we're seeing, and these are whole house demolitions. So I'll just kind of skip forward here. But we talked about additions and rebuilds. And what we did was look at from January 2023 to current. And this is what it looks like. And so obviously you are seeing, a lot of additions, a lot of new builds there. Outside of the old village, there's nothing that regulates your buildable area except for your development standards, which have always been in place. You've got your height, your setbacks, lot coverage, impervious surface. And then, like Chris just talked about, we have trees and tree protection zones. That limits your buildable area too. But the committee sent this discussion along with the heights of detached accessory structures, which appears to be a concern in that same area. to the Planning Commission, and that was on their agenda last week. Some of the things they are looking at, and they're going to continue to review it. They wanted more time, so it's going to be on the July Planning Commission as well. One of the things we offered up was, you know, in the old village, they already do building area ratio. Perhaps they extend that to Old Mount Pleasant. And that really just, what they want to get at is limiting the size of a house, right? And that's what BAR does. And they also are talking about further limiting impervious surface. Right now, it's maxed out at 40% in those areas. They're looking at maybe 35, maybe even 30%. So those are some of the things that the commission is looking at. As I said, they're going to take it up at their July meeting as well, and then they'll ultimately make some recommendations to back to planning committee, probably in August. So that's kind of what we're seeing in that area. That's
What kind of incentives like has been kind of talked about? Has there been anything particular? I'm just trying to think of what kind of incentives would work there.
It's tough because you can't, you know, the first thing the mayor talked about was how can we stop the demo of some of these more
What
modest
about
ranch
incentives to
homes?
get out of the tree protections? No.
Well, yeah, you know, you really can't prevent somebody demoing their house unless it's designated historic, and you got to have a survey for that and all of these other things. So you can offer incentives, you know, but it's sort of counterintuitive. So maybe one of the incentives is if I maintain my existing ranch and I do an addition instead of demoing and rebuild, maybe you give me additional square footage, or maybe my setbacks are a little bit different, or maybe, yeah. So it's going to be a trade-off. Those are some things that they'll have to consider, but you can't prevent somebody from demoing. One thing we did look at though was we have found in some of these older neighborhoods that if I can buy a large lot and I've got a old ranch on it, and I know that I can get 2 lots out of that, I'm probably going to demo. I'm going to go through the subdivision process. I'm going to create 2 lots, and then I'm going to build 2 big houses. And so another thing they're looking at is preventing or making it more difficult to subdivide a piece of property in Old Mount Pleasant. And that's just one of the other considerations that the commission is interested in and looking at. So, you know, like I said, you can look at some different ways to make it more difficult. You can look at incentives, but you can't really prohibit somebody from demoing their house unless it's designated historic. So, that's kind of where we're at with that. But yeah, commission will take it up in July and discuss it again. So
I don't want to keep everyone too long, so respect everyone's time. Is there anything else you had that you wanted to get to that you thought people would be interested in?
you know, real quick, I think I wanted to just touch on some of the things we're doing. I don't know if y'all are familiar. We do have our Green Commission. We already have a commercial LID program. We've probably had about 30 commercial developments or redevelopments throughout town that have participated in this. Right now, our environmental division is looking at doing a residential LID. This is not going to be mandatory. It's going to be volunteer. There's about to be some public meetings. I think the first one's tomorrow. So it's just kind of a neat way to try to get people, you know, residences involved in how can they make their lot more green, some little things they can do. And it's an incentive-based volunteer program. As I said, it's not going to be mandatory. We're doing a lot with our Green Commission as far as with our HOAs and our schools, some things like that. And then I think Josh had mentioned the wetlands. I did want to point out a couple things. Our new code has a new wetland buffer. It's a 35-foot buffer, but we recognize that this is, and we also recognize with the new zoning code that we've got a lot of things that we need to fix or correct or clarify. And this is one of them. And it very simply states that if you have freshwater wetlands on your property, you have to install a 35-foot buffer. Well, we obviously know that that's going to be very difficult. So our interpretation at this time, until we can change that code, is that this new 35-foot buffer would only apply if your development requires you to do a development impact assessment. And you typically only see those with large developments, large commercial developments. Our existing land development regulations already prohibit new lots from containing wetlands. But as I said earlier, we are looking at, I know our corporation council's currently working on an ordinance, I think, to take to Flood Resilience Committee on Monday for our committee meetings to drafting an ordinance to protect freshwater wetlands in the town. And they're looking at what Bluffton just adopted. And I don't know what that's going to look like. That's a different division, and it's involving our legal, but there are a lot of things coming over the next couple of months. So I think it'd be important to stay on top of that. But I think that's it. We still have our building permit allocation. Yeah, that's the same. That runs through 2029. We have a lot of multifamily units sitting out there. I think 500 came available and we haven't had anybody use them. So that tells us that nobody's doing a lot of building right now or doing a lot of multifamily type stuff. I know we've got the 100 attainable housing units going up in Carolina Park. Those will be exempt from the building permit allocation. But so we have all those sitting out there. And I think Josh was there the other night, but Town Center came through at Planning Commission. They would like to add about 400 residential units to a redevelopment scenario at Town Center. I think that's an important, that's going to be important for the town and for that area, particularly as some of those uses up there could go away in the event that they do. So just some big things coming that I think you'll want to kind of stay abreast of. But happy to answer questions.
Yeah, that's what it looks like we have now, because there's one change was about what happens to vacant lot that contains wetlands, but right now you
Right.
said there's no change yet on the wetlands thing.
Yeah, there's no change yet, and you'd only be required to install that 35-foot buffer if your development's big enough that it requires an impact assessment. And so if you're just a single family residence or a small commercial, we're not gonna make you put that in. And we just need to clarify that when we do some changes to the code.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today. I think obviously
You
with the
bet.
amount of questions, we have a lot of people interested in this stuff, and we'll send
Yeah.
out this additional information to everyone who attended and get you guys' contact information out to everyone. And hopefully this starts a great conversation going forward, and you'll get a lot of interest in the tree task force.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be absolutely wonderful. They need to hear. I know that council wants it to be balanced and some common sense on it. So we're hoping that we get a good discussion. And so yeah, if you can't serve on it, definitely come and speak and listen and be involved.
And I would think too is one of the big things I'd ask of them is to start documenting your buyers and what they're going through, or the deals
Right.
falling apart because of the tree protection zones and not knowing what they can do with the property. Because those stories around just the regular buyer buying a single family house that may not
Mm-hmm.
end up in Mount Pleasant anymore, or the seller who's having a problem because of that, those are the stories that the tree task force want to hear about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we just adopted this code May 1st. We're already looking at other changes. People need to have confidence in where they're coming and what they can do. And when you change the rules so much, and these rules may need to be changed, but there's that aspect of it too, is people having confidence in what they can do and what they can't do, and changing the rules midway certainly makes it more challenging. So
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. We appreciate it.
yeah, well, thanks for having us.
Bye.